Today on Callahan's Garage, it's been a little while, but we are back working on the hearse.
Hey, I'm Callahan. Welcome to Callahan's Garage.
So, welcome back to Callahan's Garage. My name's Callahan, and today we are starting on part 3 of our hearse build. So we got part 1 and part 2 already, where we did a bunch of prep work and we got the whole front air ride put together. And today we're going to work on getting the rear end together. Alright, so like I said, in part 1 and part 2, we got the whole front suspension put together. So if you haven't seen those videos, go check them out. But today we're going to start getting the rear end put together. And first things first, we got to do some cleanup and some disassembly on our old rear end here. So the rear end of the hearse was originally a leaf spring suspension, and we're going to swap it to a 4-link and air ride. So I picked up this factory 4-link rear end from a junkyard. So we're going to get some cleanup and some prep work done on this thing. We got some stuff we're going to remove on here, and then we're going to get our rear bag mounts welded on so we can get this thing up under the car and start mocking it up. Okay, so started cleaning up and looking at our 4-link rear end that we went and picked up, and started checking some measurements on it, rechecked some of my, 6-8 month old math, and it's just not really gonna work. I was being a little optimistic, hoping that rear end was gonna work, but for a couple of reasons, it's just not gonna suit the car. So first being, the lower link mounts were about a 1/2 inch off, so they're really close. My measurements, comparing cars, was pretty close. And if I was gonna run Heim joint style link bars, it would have been fine. But I do plan on running bushing style link bars just for longevity and comfort. And they're gonna have to be perfectly straight. So we're gonna make new lower link bar mounts, new upper link bar mounts, and our new bag mount. So the other big issue that we ran into was on the 4-link style rear ends, you just weld your bag mount right to the existing spring pocket. And those spring pockets just happened to fall straight underneath the frame rail on the commercial chassis. So we just weren't going to have the clearance, for that bag to cycle and be able to air all the way out. So we're going to have to move our bag mount slightly inboard and completely fabricate those from scratch. So I've ordered up some universal style brackets, and we're going to just make all this stuff from scratch. It'll be a little more work, but it'll all fit absolutely perfectly the way we need it to. So as soon as those parts get in here, we'll start throwing this thing together. But in the meantime, we got some disassembly to do, so we'll get these brake lines off of here. We need to chase out a couple of these threads. We can use these existing bolt holes for our upper link mount, and we need to cut off these leaf spring perches. So we'll get all that done, and then we'll start prepping this axle to go in the car. Okay, so while we're waiting for parts for our axle, I went ahead and did a bunch of disassembly in the back of the car. So I knew that we were going to have to pull the floor out and get some access so we could weld in our upper bag mounts back here. But I wasn't aware that when I pulled the wood deck out back here that there was going to be no floor. So there's literally no sheet metal floor right here above where the axle sits. So that's kind of a good thing, because now I don't have to cut it out. But basically what we're going to have to do is weld in, kind of an upper suspension bridge cross member in between these frame rails here for our upper bag mounts to go on. So you can see we've done a ton of disassembly in here. Chrissy came out here and did a bunch and helped me out. We ended up having to pull the whole partition out in order to get the floor out. And the floor was actually too big to get out of the car. So they must, put this wood deck in either before they put the windshield in and they push it through the windshield opening, or before they put the roofs on these cars. So it was super weird, but ended up having to cut that thing into 3 different pieces to get it out of here. So it's a total mess in here right now, but like I said, we've got to have the access here to be able to weld that cross member in. And then the other thing that we're going to do is I'm basically going to cut out everything back here in this floor section. So one of the issues with the car is, once the car is aired out, the gas tank sits right here under what would normally be the trunk floor, and it hangs really, really low. So we're going to cut this whole floor section out and raise it up. That way we can suck that gas tank up a lot higher and not run into any of those ground interference issues. The last thing we want is to be dragging holes in our gas tank. And I think what we're going to have to do is just fabricate a new aluminum gas tank from scratch, but that shouldn't be a big deal. But we'll get all of this cut out of here, and then once we get our axle ready, we can throw it up under here and start getting everything where it needs to be. Okay, so we got our factory spring perches off now. Now we just got some pretty healthy size OEM welds. Get these ground down so we got a nice clean slick tube to start with. And then we can start welding our new brackets on here. Okay, so we've got our axle completely stripped down. You can see I've got a nice clean bare spot where our leaf spring perches used to be. Got those completely removed and we're ready to start putting on the new brackets for our lower link bar mounts. So again, I got all these bracket parts from Thor Bros. It's a super useful website for odds and end brackets and stuff like this. You know, it's much easier to buy, spend a couple bucks on a bracket than, spend hours on end cutting these out. But these are gonna go on here basically just like this. And I've already done a bunch of math and measuring and figuring to locate these in exactly the right spot. So this is basically what they're gonna look like, and they're gonna sit right about there. And our angle is gonna be right there. So I've measured off the car, I've measured off the axle to determine the width that these need to sit at. And then I also measured off of our OEM 4-link axle to determine the angle that this bolt is gonna sit at. So we used our flat bump stop mount here as a reference point to zero out my angle finder there, and then squared up the center axis of this bolt so that we can locate this angle. That way everything should land right where we want it to. So we're gonna get these tacked on, and then we'll be able to put this under the car and start figuring everything else out. Okay, so now we have both of our lower link bar mounts tacked in place on the axle. I'm not going to fully weld these out until we fully confirm that everything's where it needs to be, and then it's going to cycle and function the way we need it to. And then afterwards, we'll also come in and we'll box in the back side of these mounts too, so they're really nice and strong. So we're ready to get this thing off the table, throw it under the car, and start mocking everything up. But before we can do that, we need to get our link bars together. So I bought brand new DIY link bar kits from Thor Bros as well. So we got our new bushings for both ends of our bars. We got threaded weld-in bungs, and we got the bar material itself. So I'm gonna get those cut, I'll take them to work, and we'll get them all nice and TIG welded up, and then we'll be able to throw this thing under the car and start putting it together. Okay, so we got our link bars finished up. I took these to work and TIG welded them. So we got some really nice hot TIG welds on here. These are gonna be really nice pieces. Got all of our bushings in here. So we got bushings all the way around. It's gonna be nice and quiet and comfortable. Not gonna vibrate or anything crazy like that. So these are pretty much ready to go in, but we got one more issue that we've got to fix on the front mount for our lower link bar. So we're going to take a look at that real quick. Okay, so this is the original front hanger bracket for the leaf springs, and we got a couple of issues with this. So we're going to reuse this bracket for the front mount for our lower link bar. And the biggest issue is the leaf springs were mounted with this goofy bolt where we've got this huge washer that's made onto the bolt, and it goes through this hole and locates our leaf spring bushing just like that. So a couple of issues. This thing was so rusted in here, it took me like an hour to get each one of these out. And I mangled up the threads, you know, hammering these out of here. It was just a huge nightmare. And the other issue is our new end-link bushing, you know, has a little bit of play in here. You know, it's not tight, so that's not going to work. So what I have done is I have taken this big 3/16 thick washer and then welded like an 1/8 inch thick 1/2 inch washer to that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to put this inside of our hole like that. And what that's going to do is take up all of my slop on my bushing here, so my bushing will fit nice and snug. And then that will allow me to put a bolt through the outside just like normal, locate our bushing correctly, and then I'm going to come and I'm going to weld this thick 3/16 washer all the way around to this bracket here, making it all nice, one big piece. And then this will function, you know, just like a regular bushing bracket. All right, so we got our little washer pieces tacked in here. We're gonna wait to fully weld those out until we verify that everything works. We got a link bars hung up in here. We can hook our axle up to our link bars. We'll hook our drive shaft up. We can swing this thing up into place, and then we'll start figuring out our upper link mounts. Alrighty, well, got the rest of the rear floor out. That way we can get a lot more access to get in here and fab up these upper link mounts and our bag mounts and everything. So let's jump in here, see if we can't figure this out. Alright, well, it's been a couple of days since we got any work done on the hearse. So I came out here the other day to start working on those upper link bar mounts and realized that I was completely out of 1/4 inch plate, so we didn't get any of that done. But we did start working on some of the air ride stuff, so let's take a look at that. So big bonus about working on a hearse is in the back area here. We've got these two massive storage areas that are just under the rear floor back here. So this side over here would have had a door that hinges up, and this would have been the spare tire well. But as you can see, this is where we're going to put all the air ride. So I was able to go ahead and get both of my tanks mounted down. I've got our dual compressors, got both of them mounted. I got most of my fittings and everything kind of mocked up so we can know how everything's going to go. And then I've got all of my solenoids laid up out here where we're going to mount them. So these are going to mount directly to the tank, and then we're going to have to make a support bracket to hold all those big heavy solenoids up. So I went with the individual solenoids on this setup as opposed to just like a manifold block, so that we can run 1/2 inch lines. On my silver Cadillac that I built, I ran the manifold with 3/8 lines, and I always wish that the car moved a little bit quicker when, you know, airing it up or down. So with this, we're going to be able to run 1/2 inch lines on the whole setup, and hopefully we'll be able to get, you know, much quicker reaction when we're airing up and lowering the car. So like I said, we got both of our tanks mounted in already. We've got dual 28 inch seamless tanks. These are super nice tanks. And then we've got dual 485 compressors. I've got some of my fittings already fully installed. I got both of the drains on the tanks fully installed into the bottom. I've got our pressure switch for the compressors installed, and I've got a little gauge with an adapter installed over here. So we still need to fully seal up both of our compressor feeds. I also have a Schrader valve manual feed over here in case we ever, you know, lose power, need to get some air into the system. When we've got both of our fittings for our crossover line here, and just a little air chuck I'm going to add over here in case we ever need any roadside air or anything like that. It's always nice to have something like that. So the only thing I'm really going to do specifically on here, especially on fittings like this. These come with this pre-installed sealant on them, and I've found that this stuff just really doesn't seal up consistently a lot of times, and a lot of the times it'll also be so hard and dry already that it'll be hard to get the fittings in and get a good, you know, grip on those threads. So I'm going to remove all of this sealant from a couple of these major fittings, and we'll just seal all this stuff up with tape and get them installed like normal. Okay, so I finished installing all the fittings into our tanks here, and then I also went ahead and got all of our solenoids put together. So we got 2 solenoids per bag, you know, an inlet and then an outlet, and then we've got a T-joint in the middle where that's going to run to our bag. So then we've got multiple joints on each one of these. We had to get them all taped up and everything. And these are just going to screw into a flare fitting on the tank here. But these have got a pretty good bit of weight hanging off of this fitting here. So now I'm going to make a bracket that's going to run underneath and support all the weight of these solenoids on here. So we'll look at that. So I've just got this little piece of scrap aluminum that I had laying around, and I've gone ahead and bent up one side of this. So we're just going to have a flange that's going to bolt to the floor, a little bit of rise, and then all of our solenoids are going to bolt to the top of this, and then this will keep them all nice and supported. So I went ahead and got my bends laid down on this side. We need to cut the end of this off. It's a little bit too long. And pro tip, a little circular saw is the quickest, easiest way to cut aluminum like this. This is just 90 thousandths plate, but you know, I've cut up to like 3/8 thick plate with aluminum with just a circular saw and a decent blade on it, and it'll rip right through it. Easy peasy. All right, so we got our little solenoid bracket all finished up, got all of our mount holes drilled. Same thing out here on our bolt flanges. So we can get this thrown in the car, and then once this is bolted in, all we got to do is wire all the solenoids up, plumb all the bags, and it's done. Okay, so we got all of the finish install done with all of our air ride management. So we got all of our tanks and our fittings plumbed in, and we got our little support bracket holding all of our solenoids here, and all of our solenoids are all sealed up and ready to go. So the last thing we need to do is run the wiring and the air lines to this, but we're waiting on a couple of bulkhead fittings, and then we'll get the air lines hooked up, at least to the front, and get it all wired up and working. But in the meantime, so now we're going to jump back to the rear axle again and start finishing this up, and we've got a couple of issues here. So I spent a little time yesterday working out our upper link bar mounts and looking at the geometry of all that. And with this current cross member in here, it is just not going to work. There's not enough room. So I went ahead and removed our last section of rear floor. You can see we got 2 rear body mounts right here that we're going to have to reproduce. And we're going to have to cut this whole cross member out and fabricate a new one so that we have enough room for our upper link bars to sit in here and work correctly. And you can also see we are currently sitting on our frame rail. This thing is completely bottomed out, and yet we're still not anywhere near low enough to what we want to be. So, you know, when this thing is aired out, I want the frame rail sitting on the ground. We're still about 3 inches away from that. So we're going to get that cross member cut out inside the car, and then we're going to have to figure out how we're going to raise and C-notch that rear frame section so we can get this thing sitting a little bit lower. Okay, so we got our cross member removed, and we've got both of our link bar mounts in place. So I was able to reuse the factory mount on this side, and then we basically just duplicated the factory style mount on the other side of our axle here. So the next thing we're going to get done is we need to make the front mounts for our upper link bar. So we'll get both of those fabricated. We'll get us a new cross member in here, and then we can make sure this axle is going to cycle the way we want it to. And then we can get to the fun part of notching out this frame or raising this frame section up. Well, I have once again fallen into the trap of thinking that I have more material on hand than I actually do. So we're gonna hold off on the rear end again and jump back onto our air ride stuff. We got a bunch of wire we need to pull. We'll start getting all our relays and everything wired up for this. Okay, so I got all our long lengths of wire pulled. You can see here, got our battery cable hooked up for our compressors. Got a nice little inline fuse here up close to the battery so we don't burn the car down. And then we've got all this run up through under the hood, nice and neat. Nice little braided loom, nice out of the way. Up into the firewall. And then I've got it run under the carpet, nice and neat and professional. We got our big 8-gauge power wire for our compressors here. Then I've got my compressor loom, same braided loom, all run and heat shrink and up here ready to hook up. I got my signal wire running up to the fuse panel, so now we just need to get the relays and we'll get all this stuff hooked up. So we finished wiring up the compressors now. We've got the loom built, we got the relays mounted and all wired up. Everything there looks good. Next thing we've got to move on to, and we got to wire up all these individual solenoids. And we've got to wire them to our controller here. So we've got just a basic 7-switch controller. And you can see we've got all these little wires we got to connect. And just because of the location and everything, the controller isn't going to reach to every individual solenoid. So now I've got to go and build little pigtail harnesses for every solenoid so we can extend them out to where it's going to reach our controller. And there we go. We got all of our solenoids wired, got little pigtails coming out of each one, all into our braided loom. And I've gone ahead and I've labeled every solenoid, and then I've labeled all of my wires. And I can hear some of you typing in the comments already, oh, y'all, your wires are the same color. I don't care. I don't have 8 different colors of wire on hand. They're all labeled. I know which one's which. It's not going to be a big deal. So now we just need to connect all of these to all of these, and then our controller will work. Okay, we have finished up the wiring. So we got both of our compressors wired up to our relays back here. We got all of our solenoids wired up, all loomed together up through here. And then we've got our controller up here with plenty of length to go up under the seat to where we can run it while we're driving. And pro tip, if you're planning on putting all of this in the trunk and running a controller like that, 9 times out of 10 you will have to buy an extension harness because it's not going to reach all the way back to the trunk. But we got all our wiring finished up. And tomorrow I'm going to come out and I'm going to get the front air lines hooked up, and we're going to see the front end go up and down finally. Okay, so we are totally done with all of our air ride management now. We finished up all the wiring yesterday. Today I got pretty much all of our airlines run. So I've got both of my front airlines fully hooked up. I put these handy little bulkhead fittings here in this rear bulkhead so our airlines can just go straight into there and then come out the back. So we will get the rear ones hooked up once we finish all the fab work on the rear end. But now we're going to let these tanks fill up and we're finally going to test out the air ride on the front end and see if this thing is worth all of this work. That'll do. Yo! Alright, well, front end's definitely working. I wanted some quicker movement with those 1/2-inch lines, and we definitely got that. So I think we're probably going to put some like mufflers on the outlets, and that'll help slow that descent speed down and quiet the outlet pressure as well. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. We got the whole front done. We got all our management done. We still got a bunch of fab work to do on the back and get our gas tank built, but we'll save that for another day. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.